There's a very real possibility that history will look back at 2020 as the year that broke DC Comics. It's too early to proclaim absolute doom with unwavering certainty, but for the first time in a very long time, the future of DC Comics as a publishing entity and one half of the Big Two is in serious doubt. Tremendous layoffs struck DC Comics in August 2020 as the effects of the AT&T Warner Brothers merger fully materialized. The publishing line was gutted, and despite Jim Lee's efforts to assuage concerns over time that this is the end of DC Comics, there's little use denying the publisher won't be the same for some time. Today I'll answer, what are the best DC comics of 2020 so far? Even with all this in mind, of course, good creators are going to create good comics, and we've seen plenty of that throughout the year in the DC universe. It's just been spread out across a variety of different lines, such as their young adult graphic novels, Black Label, and of course the ongoing superhero universe, among others. I'm Dave. Welcome to the best DC Comics of 2020. You can check out the full list over on comicbookherald.com. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel or podcast, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. Spoilers for some discussed comics may follow, although I anticipate this will be a pretty spoiler-light episode. Honorable mentions first before I get into my top 10 in descending order. Strange Adventures, number 1. There's a lot to be said about Strange Adventures from Tom King, Mitch Gerads, and Evan Doc Shaner, but this is one 12-issue series where I'm definitely going to have to wait and see how it all comes together. Visually, Strange Adventures is already a triumph, but I need to see where King is taking us story-wise before I'm really certain how I feel. Right now, I will definitely say it's up there with Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy for the 2020 book I most eagerly read new issues of without feeling certain about placing it among the best books. The Dollhouse Family, which I don't have pictured here, if I was a bigger fan of Hill House horror, I'd almost certainly have to find a place for this book written by Mike Carey. For the record, that the fact that it's not on here and Hill House horror isn't higher on my list, it says more about my own squeamish sensibilities and less about the quality of the line. And finally, Justice League Dark. I've particularly enjoyed Justice League Dark since the immensely talented Ron V took over as series writer. He co-scripted some issues with James Tynion, of course, as he moved over to Batman, and it's been a very interesting book that I would recommend checking out since that time. So again, these are the honorable mentions that are all very interesting. But in descending order of my 10 favorites, kicking it off here with Suicide Squad. The Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo era of Suicide Squad is deceptively challenging, largely, although not entirely, moving away from the tried and true squad of Amanda Waller leading DC villains and creating their own characters and a system for a newer version. I've realized reading the run just how conditioned I am when reading Big Two comics to expect the shorthand of known Big Two characters. I can pick up any issue focused on Harley and Deadshot and know their whole deal without much exposition, but when the focus is on new characters like Wink and Airy, I have to focus and pay attention, and I've actually found myself sort of bristling at that notion, which is goofy, and I recognize that. So I appreciate the ambition of what Taylor's trying to do in bringing in like a very different feel for a Suicide Squad line that is like, it post movie is more well known than ever, but it is kind of been treading water for a while now. So I appreciate it. The Dreaming Waking Hours. We're only 2 issues in at the time of recording, but I have to admit, there's this tricky cognitive dissonance I feel with the relaunched Sandman Universe line of comics, where I'm simultaneously holding the thought that I'm not really sure I need more from the dreamscape that, Neil Gaiman and company built, but I also recognize the work set inside The Dreaming has been really good so far. Cy Spurrier and Bill Kazively's The Dreaming was a great extension on what this new era can be, and this latest 2020 Maxi Series launch of The Dreaming Waking Hours from G. Willow Wilson and Nick Robles in the creative unit is following in that tradition, kind of exactly how I'd hope. Again, it feels like we're in this world post Morpheus Sandman universe, and it's not super focused on the titular Sandman of the Sandman universe. Instead, it's kind of really investigating dreams and nightmares and these different characters and worlds, and of course all the people who fit within them, which is always what Sandman was all about. So this series is off to a great start. Next up, number 8, You Brought Me the Ocean. Amidst all this trouble DC's been encountering, the YA line of DC graphic novels has been incredibly consistent and expanding at a really rapid rate. In addition to targeting a long-ignored, enormous market of readers, these DC graphic novels also tend to do a much better, more clear-eyed job integrating issues of diversity and social justice naturally into their stories. You Brought Me the Ocean by Alex Sanchez and Julie Moreau is a fantastic example, developing an origin story for Jackson Hyde, aka Aqualad, one of DC's few openly gay characters and a black male teenager. One of the clearest takeaways from the recent shocking passing of Chadwick Boseman is that representation in art matters tremendously. You Brought Me the Ocean excels in this regard, effortlessly weaving an array of intersectionality throughout Sanchez's keen understanding of queer youth and Moreau's gorgeous, expressive artwork. Well worth checking out, even though it hasn't gotten a ton of publicity. Number 7 on my list, John Constantine Hellblazer. I'm not a Hellblazer head, but between the New 52 and DC Rebirth, bringing John Constantine back to a Black Label meets Sandman universe home for mature readers, is the most interested I've been in the character in a decade. John Constantine Hellblazer is a great take on the legacy of DC's legendary British bastard by Cy Spurrier, Aaron Campbell, Jordi Belair, and Aditya Bidikar, with covers by John Paul Leone. The only real negative here is that this run on Hellblazer has already been canceled, ending with issue number 12, or at least it's going to be, clearly well before Spurrier and company could tell the full story they wanted to tell. This could have been a good long run on many a Best of DC list to come, but unfortunately that's just not going to be the case. But nonetheless, as depressing as that might be, it can't take away the good work that this creative unit has produced in 2020. Again, like it alternates between, John Constantine always just sort of putting people through the ringer and doing, whatever he needs to get by, taking on demons, but it's also sometimes funny and it's also sometimes sad and all the best things that Hellblazer can be. I think the series is achieving right now, so I'm definitely going to be bummed out to see it go. Number 6 on my list is DC's Dead Planet. Tom Taylor keeps crafting universes out of gimmicks, and despite every indication that these things should not work, giving Taylor the keys to his own DC Universe kingdom keeps bearing fruit. After the success of Injustice, Taylor launched a laughably punny riff, many rightly compared to Marvel Zombies, only to see the Deceased universe, become every bit the biggest smash hit of 2019. Dead Planet is the sequel to the series, that sees DC's Earth completely ravaged by an anti-life zombie virus, and somehow it manages to retain the stakes and traumatic loss by focusing on the children, or proteges, of many new Justice Leaguers, many of whom died or were converted into these monsters in Deceased. So it continues to be extremely engaging and well worth checking out. Number 5 is a recurring picks from 2019's list, The Green Lantern. It's definitely a weird thing to watch Grant Morrison exit superhero comics quite like this. Not with a bang, but with sort of this collective whimper of a fandom that's either, one, completely put off by the density and encyclopedia of story here, or two, wondering why in the hell their beloved Morrison is walking away with something so, it's kind of it's seemingly very self-indulgent. I'll admit, as much as I've enjoyed the ride, The Green Lantern is in many ways the type of work only a walking away from supers Grant Morrison could get away with. In my book, Liam Sharp is doing career best work across the entire 2-season run, but even Sharp can only do so much with some of Morrison's least approachable impulses. All of which is to say, I understand the challenges of this work, but I'm also invested enough to appreciate the heapings of Silver Age Lantern lore at the center of this Hal Jordan-centric affair, as well as Morrison's desire to return to multiversity one last time. It's definitely a book for Morrison heads only, but in that vein, because I like his work and have grown on me over time, it's something I continue to be very interested in. My number 4 pick is Wonder Woman Dead Earth. I'm such a fan of Daniel Warren Johnson as a creator, especially after Murder Falcon, a book I really can't recommend highly enough, that I had preposterously high hopes for his 4-issue Black Label series, Wonder Woman Dead Earth. Amazingly, the post-apocalyptic take on a recognizable but dramatically altered DCU, in this case Diana-centric universe, it lives up to the hype and then some. I think, you can take it as a given that Daniel Warren Johnson is going to put in absolutely astonishing artwork and kinetic energy in his books, but the story really holds up as well. It's this post-apocalyptic vision, kind of an uncompromising vision, again, being very Diana-centric. It does not give in to some of the impulses that I think a lot of post-apocalyptic tales can have in the DC universe, where, you have to really bring in a lot of Batman and Superman. Don't get me wrong, it's still set in the DC universe. There might be some of that, but it's definitely not the center of the work. My next pick, number 3 on the list, is Jimmy Olsen. When I made my early Best DC Comics of 2019 list, I included Jimmy Olsen by Matt Fraction and Steve Lieber as my number 1 pick before I'd read a single full issue. I was that confident just based on the creative team and the excellent short story they contributed to the Superman Leviathan Rising Special number 1 event lead-in. Oh, to be young and excited about the possibilities of Event Leviathan. For the first handful of issues, though, the sidewinding structure and convoluted narrative definitely had me scratching my head. The approach of Fraction and Lieber is quite unlike anything going in superhero comics, and also requires a lot of careful consideration and focus that honestly in the beginning, like my wee monthly Supers brain just was not prepared for. But, coming back, looking at all 12 issues, all told, now that we're here, it turns out Jimmy Olsen is pretty damn special. Like, I was right to assume that a Fraction and Lieber work would be worthy of saying this is probably going to be one of the best DC comics of the year. And these 12 issues, they might be even better than I'm positioning them here, honestly. The way that they go about telling this sort of off-the-walls Jimmy Olsen story is really, really incredible. And again, like, it's a story structure that I have not seen done in comics. I mean, forget just superhero comics. So it's worth checking out on those merits alone. My number 2 pick is Far Sector, Green Lantern. Turns out handing over a totally standalone Green Lantern universe series to Hugo Award-winning writer N.K. Jemisin is a pretty good bet. Like, pretty safe bet. That's going to lead to an awesome, awesome comic. Jemisin and Jamal Campbell's take on the core is unlike anything in DC, with Joe Mullen and the City Enduring instantly making the mythos the freshest and most compelling it's felt in ages. This is definitely a Wednesday read for me. Like, there are certain comics that I'll sit on and I'll wait, and maybe I'll get to them when I get to them. Green Lantern Far Sector is the second a new issue comes out. That's a book that is absolutely at the top of my pile, and I have to read and want to know where it's going. So I believe it's scheduled to be 12 issues. It's a limited, intentionally limited run, which is probably ideal, honestly. Like, I want more from this creative team, and I'd love to see more in this world. But again, having a set endpoint in mind, I think, is going to contribute to a story that can be passed down as a standalone kind of like, hey, you want to see if you like DC Comics? Check out this one. I think Far Sector is going to enter that canon pretty soon. Speaking of entering the canon as all-time greats, my number 1 pick, and this one extends to really just my favorite comics of 2020. It's very high on that list as well. Superman Smashes the Klan. Not much in comics this year quite matches the pure storytelling and clear messaging bliss of Gene Luen Yang and Guruhiro's Superman Smashes the Klan. For any of us who are privileged enough to think reviving a 1940s Superman radio serial about fighting the KKK was quaint in our modern age, 2020 has proven time and again that the lessons of racial justice in these pages are as relevant as they've ever been. Superman Smashes the Klan is already ranked as one of my 100 favorite comics of all time. You can check out that list over on Comic Book Herald. And again, like, I just can't say enough good things about it. It's one of my favorite comics of the year. It's one of my favorite Superman comics of all time. It's one of my favorite 100 comics ever. And like, that's anything inside my top 100 is something I value extremely, extremely highly. I definitely love that comic. It's a long list of everything I've ever read, right? It's not just, that doesn't mean it's like low if it's number 100. That means it's something I think very highly of. Superman Smashes the Klan fits that bill and then some. So what are your favorites of the year so far in DC Comics? Any comics that I missed that I should either read or consider? There definitely are some bigger names here, definitely, especially within the ongoing superhero line that I am not including, and it's by design. It's books like Bendis' Superman World I have fallen out of favor with, Legion of Superheroes. Again, it's the books that I'm interested in but are not doing it for me. I've talked a little bit on the show here on the Comic Book Herald channel about Death Metal really letting me down this year, having very high expectations, and that not living up to my hype. And Batman by Tynion has been, I think, solid, but not excellent. Especially as we have gone into Joker War, like, there's definitely positives. I don't think like these are, everything I'm saying isn't on the list here is out and out bad in any measure, right? There are positives in all of them, but they didn't make the cut. So let me know what makes your list, and anything that definitely I might have listed, especially on like the Black Label side of things, because there's books there where it might be off my radar. All right, so thanks everybody for listening. You can find ways to support Comic Book Herald endeavors over at patreon.com/Comic Book Herald. And I always like to give a shout out here to the Mysterious Benefactors tier. Thank you to all the individuals supporting Comic Book Herald at the Mysterious Benefactors level. It is extremely generous of you and always much appreciated. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald, pretty much anywhere on social. You can also look for the best comics ever in my Marvelous Year podcast for more from me and what I do. So thanks everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.